Okay guys, today's lesson is on finding the slope of a line using 2 points, and we're not going to be graphing it to do it. So we won't have a graph. We're just going to have 2 coordinate pairs and find the slope of a line that goes between them. So just like in this example right here, what is the slope of a line that contains the 2 points 2, 5 and 4, 9? Now for this first example, I am going to graph it just to show you where 2, 5 and 4, 9 would be on a graph. So you have a graph. You label your first point 2, 5 right here. There's 2, 5 and 4, 9. There's 4, 9, and you connect them with a line. Now to find the slope of a line, we should all know, this should be a review, it's rise over run. So between the 2 points, you calculate how far up and how far over, that's the rise and the run, you go. So from this first point to this second point, I rise, that means a vertical rise. I rise 1, 2, 3, 4, and I run 2. So my rise is 4, my run is 2 to go from one point to the other. And we always go from the leftmost point to the rightmost point, and just makes it easier. So my slope is 4 over 2, which we do have to simplify. 4 over 2 is just 2, and that's your slope. Remember, m is an abbreviation for slope. It's the variable we use to represent slope. So the slope of this line is 2. Now I'm going to use the same example to show you how you could calculate this without graphing it. So without graphing it, we still need to calculate rise over run, basically. But we want to be able to do that just using the numbers in the point. So what you need to know is that the rise of 4 right here that we get that by subtracting this y and this y. Because if I'm starting at 5 and going up to 9, that's my y values. That tells you how far up and down you're going. From 5 to 9 is a rise of 4. So the way we're doing that is we're subtracting the y values, and that's your rise. The run is controlled by the x's. So I'm starting here at x equals 2. So right here I'm at x equals 2, and I'm moving over to x equals 4. So to go from 2 to 4, that's going to be a run of 2. 4 minus 2. So to get my rise and my run, I can just use the y's and the x's of the points that I'm given. So basically the rise is the y's. This you need to write down for future reference. The rise is the difference in the y's. So it's the difference of the two y values. The run is the difference of the two x values. Now you have to be careful with positives and negatives. It does not matter which point you start with when you're subtracting, as long as you start with that point for the x and the y. As long as you're consistent, you're okay. So I started with 9 for my y's, so I have to start with 4 when I do my run. So whatever point you start with, do that for both y and x. So we're basically calculating, when we're calculating this rise over run, it's the difference in y over the difference in x. The word difference is often represented with a triangle symbol that represents delta. Delta is just another symbol that means the difference. So another way you'll see this written sometimes is that the slope is represented by delta y. That's a shorthand way of saying the difference in y's over delta x, the difference in x. So just another symbol that you need to be aware of. Delta, that triangle, just means the difference. So let's practice a little bit. Let's say I have 2 points, -2, -3, and 4, -1. So if these are my 2 points and I want to find the slope without graphing it, I'm not graphing this one, my slope, m, is rise over run, we know that. But since I don't have a graph, that's tough to calculate. It's basically delta y, the difference in y, over the difference in x. So we have to find the difference of y's. Remember, first point is x, second point is y. First point is x, second point is y. So we're going to pick one point to be like our first point. It doesn't matter. If I want this to be my first point, I'll label them with a little 1. So that's like saying x, my first x and my first y, and I'll label these with a little 2. That says that's my second x and y, just so I know which ones to start with. So I'm going to say delta y is my difference in y's. So I'm going to start with my first one. That would be this one, -3, difference being subtract. There's my second one, -1. So there's my difference for y's over delta x. I'm going to do the same one. Since I started with the first x, I'm going to start with, the first y, I'm going to start with the first x, -2, and subtract the other one. Just make sure if it's negative, you keep those negative signs. So it's basically the y minus y and the x minus x. Now, -3 minus 1 is the same as -3 plus +1. So that's -2 for your rise. -2 minus 4 is the same as -2 plus -4. So that's -6. And then I simplify. If you have a negative over a negative, that's going to become positive, and they can both be divided by 2. So my slope is 1/3 when it gets simplified. So another way of describing your slope, besides just saying delta y over delta x, is to call it y minus y. And I'm just using the numbers 1 and 2 to show, kind of separate the difference between my first point and my second point, over the difference in x's, x1 minus x2. Again, it doesn't really matter which point you use for your 1 and which point you use for your 2, as long as you're consistent. So let's try another one. Let's try 8, -3 and -4, -1. So if these are your 2 points, we're going to get the slope again by calculating delta y over delta x. So I'm going to basically do one of my y's minus the other, and one of my x's minus the other. I'm going to pick one of these points as my first point. 1, sorry. So that point is my first point. That point is my second point. And then I just use the formula, subtract the y's. So starting with -3 minus -1, and subtract the x's. So 8 minus other x is -4. So -3 minus -1, that's the same as -3 plus +1. Again, I get -2. 8 minus -4 is like 8 plus 4, so that gives me 12. And I can simplify that. 2 over 12 simplifies to -1/6. So that's my slope. So my slope is a -1/6. One more example. So -6, 5, and 4, 10. Those are 2 points on a line. We need to find the slope. So I'm going to start off by doing delta y over delta x, just to get you used to using that symbol, because I know that's probably new. Delta y would be the y's subtracted. So pick one to start with. You don't always have to write the y1 and the x1 and all that. Pick a point that you're going to start with. I'm going to say this is my first one. That's what I'm going to start with for both the y's and the x's. So y is 5 minus the other y is 10. So that's my rise. My run is the x's subtracted. So I started with 5 on this point, so I have to start with 6 when I do the x, -6. Subtract the x's, -6 minus 4. And then I do that subtraction. 5 minus 10 is -5. That's my rise. -6 minus 4 is -10. That's my run. A negative over a negative is a positive, and 5 over 10 simplifies to 1/2. So my slope is 1/2. 1/2. And that's how you calculate the slope if you're given 2 points and you can't or you don't want to graph it.